this horrible year never end?
We've never lost a year before, and I'll be damned if we're gonna lose one on my shift.
You're listening to the Piercing Wizard podcast, and I'm your host, Ryan Willett. I'm a professional body piercer with 20 years experience. I travel around the world teaching technique and safety classes, and I'm a member of the Association of Professional Piercers. Listen in as I talk to my friends and colleagues about our industry so we can all stay sharp.
Happy New Year! Hi everybody, this is Lola Slider, and you're listening to the end of year recap podcast from the Piercing Wizard. With me today is my co-host Ryan Willett. Ryan, how are you feeling today?
Sick.
Sick?
Sick.
Sick as a dog.
Sick, well, sick maybe not as a dog, because I think dogs at least wag their tails and are happy when they're sick. I'm in Glasgow with you right now, and I think I caught a travel bug on the way over, and it's been pretty obnoxious, like having like a short amount of time to spend with you and being poorly.
I'm okay though, because of my superior Glaswegian immune system.
Yeah, well, it's because you live in the Har.
In a shower drain.
Yeah, you live in a shower drain, and it's impossible for you to get sick here. So, I'm a fragile, delicate American, and I caught a cold. I caught a cold. I got the sniffles on the flight over. We're gonna do a little bit of a recap for the year and kind of talk about where we think piercing is right now and where piercing might be going in the short-term future. I want to remind people listening that if you're interested in attending the 2024 APP conference, but you don't necessarily think that you have the financial means to attend on your own, this is scholarship season. So you can go to safepiercing.org and you can read all the information about how to apply for one of the legacy scholarships. And I've really seen it change lives and careers, and all you have to do is put in the effort. So go to the website, read about the application, submit an application. You only have a few more weeks left to do it. I'm pretty sure that wraps up around the end of January 2024. So take the time to check it out. I'm also going to be doing a live seminar in Dallas, Texas on Sunday, January 28th, 2024. So you still have time to get registered, get verified, sign up for that. If you're interested, I'll be doing a mix of information, but you can get more info about that at my website, ryanpba.com. So in 2023, just like a couple of like little numbers, we made 15 podcasts, and that's not a lot. And sometimes I feel kind of guilty that I'm not putting out more podcasts, because like there was a point where I would put them out once a week. So in a year I'd put out, 50-ish episodes, and now I'm down to 15 episodes. I feel like we put out some really good ones this year, though. And you were saying that your favorite was which one? The downsizing?
There was one that we did that was downsizing retainers referrals, and that was from back in March. And I just like that we had a right good whinge. I like complaining with you on the podcast sometimes. I don't think that we say anything terrible, but I mean, sometimes you're surrounded with a lot of conversation about how we should just constantly be grateful, gratitude, love, everything, and I feel all of that stuff. I feel really grateful, but it doesn't change the fact that there are parts of the job, just like any job, that sometimes you need to have a bit of a whinge about. So I enjoyed doing that. It's kind of indulgent. And I think I also really enjoyed the podcast that we did live at BMXNet with Cale Roberts. I thought that they were a really, really great guest to have on, and I liked some of the conversation and insight that came up from that. So if you haven't listened to it, I would go back and listen to that. What about you?
Well, I like all of them for their own reasons. Obviously I'm the person doing a lot of the editing and planning and stuff for these podcasts, so it's like I do
nothing.
Well, no, you make significant contributions to the conversation, and like I don't think that they would be as fun without you and as informative without you. Like I think my solo perspective can only go so far, and a lot of times you make me rethink my positions, and we can have these nice conversations about the different perspectives of maybe the same issue. But when I invite people on, it's because I think they have something important to talk about or a good perspective. When we do episodes without like a guest, we're talking about a subject that's important to us and that we've put a lot of thought into. So they're all special to me for different reasons. One of the things that really sticks out for me in 2023 is how many people have sent me messages saying that they've like just discovered the podcast and that they've gone back. And there are some people who have been listening to them in order from like episode 1, and it's like kind of cringy for me because there were a lot of different points in my career where I'd maybe not want to revisit them exactly, and some of the actual like quality of the episodes was mixed because I didn't know how to make a podcast for quite a while, and debatable if I even do now. But I just want to say thank you. If you're one of those people who is kind of newish to the podcast and you went back and listened to some of the older content, there's a lot of stuff out there, and there are a lot of important voices and perspectives. So I appreciate people listening still.
For people that have been listening since the beginning, I'm probably like the late stage Poochie character.
Yeah. And now, Lola. Well, no, I also think that if people have been listening for a while, like as much as I love the sound of my own voice, I'm pretty sure that people appreciate having an alternative perspective, and arguably you're much smarter than I am. So I think that you've changed the podcast for the better.
Thanks.
You're welcome. I made also roughly 15 or so videos for my Patreon page. That's what is probably the main reason as to why I haven't put out weekly podcast episodes, because I just don't have the time and the energy to do like all of it all the time. So a lot of my energy is now focused on the Patreon videos, and I put out quite a few there. And I have like loads of ideas. Like I'm still really motivated for that. The podcast, sometimes I have trouble finding motivation, finding subjects. I really like it when people give us suggestions and ideas for shows, and we can kind of run wild and like ruin their idea. But the videos, like I've still been really enjoying making the Patreon videos. I made a little bonus video for people at the end of the year showing an 8-gauge pubic piercing, and it's not something that I'm gonna like really promote on my social media, be like, hey, come and check out this video about pubic piercings, because pubic piercings have such like a low viability for long-term success. But
yeah,
it was really fun to do the piercing. It was really fun to capture the video and to publish it for people. So if you're interested, check it out. But that's not one of those piercings where I'm going to try to imply that it's like if you go through the steps, like pubic piercings are going to heal great for you, because they're probably not. Have you ever done a pubic piercing?
I have.
Yeah? How did it work out?
Fine. Like it looked just the same as the one that you're showing in the video, but I don't know what became of it. I never got an update on it kind of years later. But I think with pubic piercings, they exist in that space where a lot of people want to get them because they've read or heard that it can be a partner pleasing piercing, like for grinding. But then obviously grinding on a surface piercing is like the worst thing for it. So it kind of exists in that realm of like there are going to be those rare clients that can heal it and have it. The same as with the like the Madison piercing. I've seen a couple of people getting them recently, and some of them will probably heal, and it's just one of those things where it's kind of a roll of the dice. But I think that's why with pubic piercings in particular, they are so inconsistent. You just don't really know what's going to be happening to them, what's going to be getting thrown at them,
Yeah, I know that there's like some people on my Patreon who want to see more genital content, but I also am aware that there are some piercers who are just kind of specifically not interested in genital content. So I don't want to make too much of it. I want to have a mix, but I gotta say that I'm really excited when I get around to making that Hafadravia video, because I have 2 examples. And it's like, what are the odds that you would even do 2 Hafadravia piercings at all? Basically the top part of an apodravia piercing on someone with a sub-incision myototomy. So really interesting to get those 2 examples. So I'll do that. And I have, a handful of other videos too. I recorded a labret piercing. When was the last time you did just like a traditional labret piercing?
About a week ago.
Okay, fine.
But to be fair, before that, it was a few months. And for me, the labret piercing is probably like more intimidating than a septum piercing to me.
Yeah.
Septums, I see all the time and come in, and they make me a little bit nervous, and I get just as stressed as everyone else. But the labret piercing for me is higher pressure, more stress, because I don't do them that often, and they're one of those piercings where, like a septum, central face, but unlike something like a bridge piercing, which is central face, the labret has so much more movement, and it's resting against a person's teeth, and how they speak and how they talk and how they eat. All of that stuff is going to affect how it looks in the initial instance with the larger jewelry. So it's one of those ones that makes my butthole tighten up.
You know what I did for it? If you try to take a classic piercing that you've done a whole bunch of times with like more of a classic method, clamps as an example, or if someone out there is a cannula piercer and they try to do a blade style piercing, whatever, sometimes you don't get a great result because you're trying too many new things on something that you don't get to do often enough where you retain 100% of your muscle memory. So when this labret came in, my first instinct was like, well, I would do it freehand, inside out, pressure marks, tool free, yada yada. But I was like, but I can't even remember the last time I did a labret piercing. So I busted out clamps.
Same.
I just clamped it because that was what my biggest amount of muscle memory was on, because I did hundreds, if not thousands of them, like earlier in my career in the late 90s and early 2000s. Labret piercings were super commonplace. I was doing more of those than almost any other facial piercing for a long time, certainly more than like nostril piercings at the time. So it's like, well, what's wrong with clamps? Nothing. It's just that I don't usually use clamps for a lot of other stuff these days, but I thought that was the most appropriate method to use, so I just busted out clamps and I got a video of it.
Well, one of the things that I work on with my apprentice is understanding that clamps aren't training wheels. They're like a legitimate tool for piercing that require proper technique and application. A lot of people never learn that. They just treat them like baby piercer tools. They don't get good results with them because they're not applying them properly a lot of the time. And then they move on to freehand piercing and they think, oh, I don't need them. They're like the stabilizers on a bike. Whereas I never felt that way. And there's not many, but the labret is one of the few piercings that I'll just set up with a clamp before I've even looked at the customer. Very rarely will I take a look at them and go, actually, you know what, I think I'd be happier without the clamps. So at least 9 times out of 10, I'm going to be clamping a lower central labret piercing. And I get good results like that, and I'm very comfortable with it like that. So it's one of those nice piercings to just remind you that clamps are a legitimate tool for doing your job. They're not like baby piercing tools. Right.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. And I know that you might want to avoid certain kinds of tools, certain kinds of piercings. Like I'm not going to bust out a clamp for like a nipple piercing or a navel piercing or something, but if that would give you the better result for a labret piercing, why not try it? And it's like, that's why I don't want modern piercers to forget about what came before, and I especially don't want you trying to outcool some imaginary internet piercer and be like, well, I'm not going to do that. It's like, well, I would way rather have a totally straight, perfectly centered, really lovely labret piercing done with a clamp than try to bust out all these other methods and have the piercing be a little bit off. And
that language as well, it does filter through to your clients, because I've had many clients ask me, oh, are you clamping it or are you not clamping it? I had a piercer clamp this. And it's like they already have this negative association to clamps, maybe because they have had a bad experience, or possibly because they've just read a lot online about freehand piercing being better, and now they're thinking like, oh, well, if a piercer clamps me, it's this old-fashioned kind of 90s thing. And I make a real habit, anytime a client asks, even though the majority of the time I'm not going to be going near anyone with a clamp, if they say, oh, are you not clamping this? I'll usually say like, well, no, I'm not going to. Some piercers do though, and that's fine. And I'll always make an effort of never leaning in to that narrative of like, oh, I wouldn't clamp this. Like maybe somebody else would and they'll get a result just as good as mine. So I don't like to play into those insecurities clients already have about the use of certain tools and certain equipment, because I think that kind of thing just comes back around in a negative way, and that if you're in the moment, you should be keeping things positive and not taking it as an opportunity to say, well, yes, I have this special technique where I freehand, because I might pull out a clamp on the next client and that's what I'll be using to give them the best result. So customers do pick up on that stuff. They hear little bits of information, fragments of information, and then they use it to make a determination, is this place good at piercing or not, when maybe they don't have a full understanding of that information. So I do think it's important to not kind of lean in to clients' negative interpretations of certain types of equipment that way as well.
Yeah, and I kind of had the opposite once. I remember an interaction I had with a client where I was piercing their nipples, and I went to go and start in on the job, and I didn't have any clamps out, and they're like, "You're not using a clamp, you're just going to do it freehand?" And they were like, they got instantly so scared, thinking that the clamp was the way that you had to do it, and that since I wasn't using a clamp, I didn't know what I was doing. And it was a really awkward conversation to have with them. You mentioned your apprentice Jordan, and I would like to mention your apprentice Jordan also, because I've seen like the huge amount of work that you two have done together this year, and the growth and all that stuff. So how is that going for you? It seems like he's made a lot of progress.
Well, he has made a lot of progress, and I think it's important to keep looking back at it, because I think in the moment, a lot of the time, it doesn't feel like you're learning new things when you're a year into an apprenticeship, and you spend a lot more time like refining and honing what you know. So there aren't as many huge groundbreaking moments. Whereas I think at that point, it's important to keep looking back and say like, yes, you're in the pocket of your apprenticeship now where it's about repetition. It's about repeating the movements over and over again, applying the same basic formula to all different kinds of anatomy and adjusting it as it's needed. And it does get repetitive, but that's good. Like, it should feel repetitive. There should be an element of predictability that starts to form where you can trust in your decision making more. And I think that it's good to just look back sometimes at some of the work from 6 months ago and see this huge difference when at the time when you looked at it initially, you might have thought, oh, you know, it's not that bad, it looks okay, and then you compare it to work from now, and it's suddenly really obvious how much of an improvement you've made. So I think that taking loads of progress pictures is really important. Like those early pieces of work, even pieces of work you're not completely happy with, document everything. It's really important to do that to help keep yourself motivated. And he also went full-time about 2 months ago now, which has made an enormous difference because now he's not splitting his time between 2 jobs. And the biggest difference is we always used to play the guess the size game. Mm-hmm. Before he even started apprenticing, there was a lot of stuff that I had him doing before he ever started his apprenticeship in terms of sizing and styling jewellery and that kind of thing. We did a lot of stuff to kind of prep him for starting his apprenticeship. And we would do what size do you think I'm going to use in this? Take a look at them and what size do you think? And sometimes they would be crazy off. Like, so you would laugh about it and be like, that's the size you think? And you would go and get it and hold it and be like, this is the size. And he'd be like, yep. And we would just laugh about how like wildly different our sizing interpretation was. And since going full time, that has gotten so much tighter to the point where, you know, he'll write on the form what size I'm going to use and I'll be like, that's the right size. So it's really more like, instead of a guess, he's now just needing that little bit of confirmation as to like, yep, that's what I was thinking. And that I think has been the biggest difference, like those differences in being able to size stuff. And I talk about that in my sizing class, is that like sizing is such an important skill.
Size matters.
Yeah, it's such an important skill to be able to have. It's so underrated. It takes such time to develop. But since going from working 3 days a week to working 5 days a week, it's like chalk and cheese. Like there's been such a difference in his ability to size things correctly. So I notice big differences, and I think he doesn't often get the distance from himself to be able to look and see those differences, but I see huge positive differences. So I think everything's going really well, and I think that it was worth putting as much time as we did into that kind of preliminary work, like learning how to handle jewellery, learning about pin bending, learning about the correct way to take jewellery in and out with minimal use of tools. All that kind of work that we did before actually starting the apprenticeship really allowed him to focus on other things. Like we spent 6 months just doing marking, skin prep and marking for all of my piercings when we worked together. I would say, you know, prep the skin. I'm going to watch you prep the skin. I want you to mark where you think it should go and try and get him further and further along in the piercing process without actually handling any sharps or anything, and kind of build things up that way. So I don't know if other piercers take that approach, but I've been trying to just push him further and further along until I can basically say, I want you to get as far as you can with this, and then as soon as you feel like you're a little stuck with something, ask me for help, I'll give you help, and then I want you to carry on and keep going as far as you can with it. And now he's been piercing clients, offering apprentice piercing on clients for almost 6 months. But again, that went from being us working very limited together to working now more full-time together has made a really big difference in the volume of work and the variety of work he's able to do.
I've trained a few people, and I think some of the bigger obstacles were just the volume of practice opportunities they had. Mm-hmm. And if it's, okay, 1 day a week versus several days a week, if it's one time a day versus an entire day of opportunities, like the more opportunities you have to grow, the more you grow, the faster you grow. So I'm really excited to see where he's at.
It's been a challenge for me as well, as anytime you have an apprentice, it's always a learning opportunity for the person doing the teaching as well. You know, I'm a very controlling of my environment, and being able to let go of that and really like let somebody else have a try at doing something without micromanaging it, that's also something that I've had to get better and better at, because day one apprentice supervised appointment piercing, I'm practically doing everything but holding the tools for him, you know, saying, okay, now do this, now do this, now do this. And that might have been necessary at that time, but as he's gotten better, I've also had to let myself step back a little bit more so that he has the opportunity to show me he knows how to do it, because otherwise how would I really know?
Sure. If
I kept interrupting. And yeah, there have been a couple of little instances where things haven't turned out perfect, and I've known in my head this is going to be a problem, and you have to kind of decide when to intervene and when to let him make a small mistake. Not a mistake that's going to put someone in danger, obviously, but there are those moments where you kind of have to let somebody do something imperfect, and that's a difficult thing to know how to do, and to measure when you should be holding back and letting someone follow through with something and see what result they get, and when you should be going, okay, stop before you go any further. Because I feel like the more you interrupt, the more you can discredit the person, and they're trying to build trust with the clients as well. So I do like to let him take things as far as he can, but it's definitely been a big challenge for me to learn how to let him do everything.
Yeah.
That's also been a challenge for me.
You can't grow any confidence too if you're being so like wrapped in cotton wool. If you're being protected too much, you don't get the opportunity to build any confidence, because I think confidence comes from overcoming a challenge. So, well, talking about your apprentice kind of got us talking about body piercing in general, and it's maybe a little bit challenging to hone in on the thought until we kind of start to jump right in on the thought. A problem I'm noticing is in the world post-COVID, if this even counts as post-COVID. In a world. The way that I used to work is so different. I used to work 5 or 6 days a week, 8-hour shifts, and that was just kind of the American work mentality, you know, at least 40 hours, something like that. And now it's like, well, okay, we have more of like a 4-day work week. We try to shift things around with scheduling and all that stuff. You know, sometimes I'm covering for Evan, sometimes Evan's covering for me, and that changes how many hours. But it's more of like the 4-day work week instead of the 5 or 6 day work week, which is great because you have a little bit of time and energy left to live a life. But then there's the whole income dynamic of it. And I get worried that the people who are just entering this industry now might have maybe an unrealistic expectation of immediate compensation. Like a body piercer is a staff member who is generating income. They're offering a service that generates income for the shop. There are other staff members who are also generating income, salespeople, depending on what the dynamic is of your sales team. But I think if a piercer, or let's say a staff member, starts at the shop and they're not in a position yet where they're generating income, they're in more of a support system, I think it's probably there are going to be some uncomfortable growth moments for the industry coming up over the next year or two. As the next generation comes in and, you know, they want to earn a living wage, yes, but they also want to learn that, earn that like kind of generous wage in a way that piercers get. I don't know if I'm articulating this the right way.
You mean they want to live the sitcom lifestyle of someone in their mid-20s in the 90s, you know, where people would have jobs, like you could work in a coffee shop and you would be able to afford an apartment in Manhattan, like on Friends.
Like on Friends, yeah. But it's like it's a different world, because it's like, well,
shit.
like, you know, yes, you want to pay a staff member fairly, but I don't know that it can be realistic to pay an entry-level staff member in the same way that you're paying someone who's doing client services or doing like a higher level of support staff work, whether it's like appointment management, jewelry sales, stuff like that. There's going to be that entry-level staff member that's doing things more like answering the phone and cleaning and more observational stuff, and they're still kind of being trained to get to a point. So like raises should be a big part of it. Regular raises should be a big part of it. But I think that the entry-level staff member, like the person out there who wants to get their foot in the door for the industry, who wants to get into a shop with the hopes of maybe one day becoming a piercer, or maybe one day becoming an apprentice on their way to being a piercer. Like I don't know that it's realistic to put the thought in their mind that they're going to get paid like a full-time piercer right away. So is that kind of what you were thinking about?
Yeah, it's kind of about expectation management, because there have been a lot of much needed conversations in the past few years about apprentice abuse and the exploitation of free labour, and all of these kinds of things that have been incredibly important. And I think that obviously nobody should be entering an apprenticeship to be treated that way or have their work undervalued in such a way is completely unacceptable. The other side of that conversation is, well, what is acceptable? What's acceptable, what's realistic, and what's reasonable? And just because something isn't abusive doesn't mean it might not actually be pretty damn challenging for quite a long period of time. And when it comes to getting into a niche community industry like piercing, for this to be something that you do for the rest of your life, there are probably going to be a couple of tough years when you start out, just as basically starting out in any career. There's going to be an overlap period where you're probably going to have to work 2 jobs. If there's an apprentice out there that's being paid enough of a living wage and gets enough hours doing the job that they do to just work in a studio, you are in such a minority. You are so incredibly lucky. That's something that's only going to be applicable to studios that have so much disposable profit that they can take £20,000 to £40,000 or dollars and put it towards an entry-level position. Most small businesses that have that amount of disposable profit, if they're wanting to have an extra staff member, they could spend most of that money on hiring somebody that can generate income directly. Now, an apprentice, like many support members of staff or auxiliary members of staff, they do generate income. This is something that I've talked about with my apprentice, and before he was my apprentice, he was my counter person, is that while they might not directly generate income, they indirectly generate it because they help with sales, and they also allow me to do more work because they take a little bit of the work off of my hands, and I'm directly generating income that supports the studio. So they do indirectly provide a service, but in the majority of cases, apprentices don't generate enough income to be profitable. They are a financial loss because they're an investment that you're going to spend the time training this person and providing this person with a position that they can grow into, and like you say, that can have a raise at least annually. You would expect just about in any job. I mean, if you're not getting a raise annually, then you're being paid less and less every year against inflation. So I just think that it's important to be realistic about entry-level positions in the industry and what really adds value, and being able to grow into a position as it fills out around you. Because I think that that's a conversation that a lot of younger people don't ever really have. And one of the things that we talked to Kale about at BMXNet was about the benefits of being a little bit older when you get into the industry and having a better understanding of what your worth is, how to be treated, what to expect at a bare minimum, and how to advocate for yourself a little bit better and say, well, if this is where I'm at just now, where can I be a year from now? You know, and start to plan out and get invested in what your career is and be part of the conversation around your career growth. I think that that's important. So I guess kind of what I was thinking about was just painting a more realistic picture of what that first 1 to 2 years might look like. Even if you're in a reasonable position at a good studio, you're probably only going to be working part-time if what you're doing are kind of bare duties that anybody could be trained to do whilst they grow into the position. I worked 2 jobs when I started out in the industry. My apprentice has worked 2 jobs for the last 2 years and has just gotten to a point now where he's left a few months ago to work full time. And during his progression, as he's been given more tasks to do, his wage has altered to reflect that, and it'll continue to be altered at least annually. So yeah, in the beginning it's pretty tiring, it's pretty challenging, it's very, very tough. It's an incredibly competitive field because of the amount of people that want to get into it, and the rewards in those first 1 to 2 years are slim to none. So that's kind of what I was wanting to share, if that makes sense.
It does. I don't want to get out of touch with modern economies, because I don't want to get to a point where I'm unintentionally shortchanging my staff, because like I go out into the world, you go to a grocery store, you go to a fast food restaurant, and you see help wanted signs and what their advertised starting wage is, and it's like, wow, a comparable job 10 years ago was nowhere near that. And it's because of inflation, it's because of like the general economy, and it's like, well, I have to make sure that like I'm remembering that my business can't exist without my staff members. So I want to take care of them, but at the same time, I have to make sure that my business can remain viable so that everybody can still have those jobs. So it's like this double-edged sword. I think sometimes people are going to have to maybe revisit some of their service fees, maybe nudge up your service fee a little bit from time to time and use that money to provide opportunities for the staff members and, more fair compensation, things like that. I just don't think that it would be realistic for someone to say, like, I want to leave my whatever sector job and I want to get into body art and I should be able to earn a livable wage on day one. And it's like, well, you might not have the skills to earn the kind of wages that you want on day one, because you have to learn all the different skills in the shop. You have to learn the safety elements. You have to learn the different jobs. Like, I'm very incremental in the way that people learn in my studio. You start with things like sweeping or cleaning a bathroom or answering a phone, and then over time you go into things like working in the processing room and doing jewelry sales and eventually doing client services and things like that. And all those things should include bumps in pay because it's more work done to support the store. But I don't want to be one of those like older people that's out of touch and be like, in my day we earned minimum wage and we liked it. And it's like, no, we didn't. It sucked.
Yeah, nobody likes it. I just feel like that there's a part of the conversation, like a realistic part of the conversation, that isn't always had. We talk a lot about what's not acceptable, what's completely inappropriate, and in terms of what is acceptable, there's what would be preferred, and then there's what's realistic and what you could actually expect. And I think that, yes, in the beginning, if you're starting an apprenticeship, not just in piercing, but in any job that requires an apprenticeship, that requires live training, the beginning is going to probably suck a little bit for quite a long time. But the best way, I think, to kind of remedy that and get through that is take an active interest in, okay, well, if I succeed at this, when can I expect my duties to change? When would it be realistic to review having more tasks added to my job description? What could I expect to be compensated for doing this additional work? Is there going to be an annual review of my wages? These are reasonable, fair enough questions to ask an employer in any job, not just in piercing. And I think if you are an employer as well, and this is again another thing that came up when we were doing the live podcast at BMXNet, is I've had to learn how to be an employer because nobody taught me how to do that, and I've been a long-term career self-employed person, which means I haven't been employed really by anyone else in a very long time. So I've had to learn how to do that job. So if, like me, you're in the early stages of being an employer, you have to learn what is fair and what is reasonable, and to not just base it on the experience that you had 10, 15, 20 years ago. There might be elements of that you wish to incorporate, but you do have to be realistic about what your business can afford and what you can offer, not mislead anybody, and I think just be frank and straightforward. about what the job involves, what the compensation can be, and what's a realistic expectation of, okay, what about a year from now? What about 2 years from now? I think if you're apprenticing somewhere, you should have a real prospect of being in that studio for many years to come. So I don't think it's unreasonable to say, well, you know, if everything goes well and I'm doing all of this work and I do well at it and things progress, what's reasonable for me? So that you can actually have a goal to work towards, so that when things are tough, you can say, well, you know, in 6 months' time or in 10 months' time, I'm going to move on and things are going to get a little bit easier and this pressure is going to come down a little bit. I think that that's an important conversation for businesses to be having with their apprentices and vice versa. So maybe we could just have some more of those conversations in amongst talking about what's absolutely unacceptable, what are realistic expectations of what is acceptable. And I think realistically, in less than 1% of studios are you going to be able to walk into a full-time 40-hour-a-week paid apprenticeship.
Right.
Unless you're in an absolutely massive studio with many, many members of staff contributing to the profits of that business. I don't think that that's very realistic.
Well, because like you said, like if in my studio, if I had the money to hire someone in a paid apprenticeship tomorrow, I would probably actually rather take that money and hire a piercer who can just kind of start on day one and get where they want to get. I feel like that's kind of a problem in the industry right now. If you look at the piercers out there who are those like traveling guest artists, they're super in demand because a studio knows that that's like a really great investment. You can hire somebody to come in for a week or two or a month or, you know, frequent guest visits. You can pay them and you know that they can do the job, or hopefully they can do the job when they show up. But it's such, as you said, it's such an investment to train someone from scratch, and there's still no guarantee that that person's actually going to be good at it at the end of the journey too. So it's really difficult. I want to make sure that studio owners out there are trying to think like, take care of your people, give them opportunities, try to give new people opportunities, try to bring people in when you feel like someone's the right fit for your studio. The guest artist thing, like, that can be great too, but studios need resident piercers. Like, guest piercers can be a band-aid for a while, but you need resident piercers, and sometimes that means you have to go through the investment of starting someone at the bottom and working their way up.
And that's what I've always had in mind as a goal with my apprentice. That's something I've always kept in mind, is I'm not training him to just be able to do certain tasks or be able to cover a day when I don't want to work or that kind of thing. I'm training him to have a career in piercing, like I have a career in piercing.
Right.
Like, I've done this job. This will be in 2024 my 14th year as a full-time professional body piercer. Never had a part-time job apart from the first year that I started out working as a piercer when I didn't have the hours to cover the income that I needed to make. Since then, I've done this as my full-time job, my full-time career, and that's what I'm training. I'm training a career. And I think that that's something that's good to have at the front of your mind. If you have an apprentice, if you're thinking about taking on an apprentice, those are important things to keep in mind. It is an enormous sacrifice of time, and it's a gamble because either person could walk away at any moment as well. I mean, obviously I'm not going to, and Jordan's not allowed to, he's been told that. So there's this enormous sense of trust as well that you have to have, and that's why we spent a year of just having Jordan work the front counter before apprenticing. And I said when I hired him initially, I want you to do this job for a year if you can, and if you're still enjoying it after a year and you want to learn more and you're enjoying the clients and the work, then we can look at getting an apprenticeship for you. But I would never at this point, I mean, I'll probably never have an apprentice again, but if I were to, that's again how I would do it. I couldn't imagine going in cold with somebody without really knowing that person at all, or them having any idea what they were getting themselves into.
Yeah.
So I probably won't have another apprentice, but for anyone who's thinking about it, I would definitely say, leaning into desk work and learning as much as you can about front of house work. And again, that's a full-time job in and of itself. And if at the end of it he'd said, you know what, I think I just want to work the desk, that would have been fine. That would have been totally okay as well. But I think that's why it's good to learn that role first, to kind of find out where you fit, where you feel like you fit.
Not to get too far down it, and maybe we'll just touch on a couple of things. Like, you also hear people out there saying, like, well, toxic work environment. And I get that sometimes that's not all like interpersonal dynamics. Sometimes it's like, pay rates and all those things. I would just like to say that, like, we are far beyond the point where you can expect someone to just answer your phone and do all that stuff for free with the hope of maybe getting trained one day. Like, I don't think that apprenticeships should be non-compensated anymore. Like, I would see it as like, well, maybe your role is getting paid to do the desk, and then maybe if you want to, stay after or come in on off days for some observation, and like, that will work towards an apprenticeship. But I really don't want to see people just like working for free with the hopes of maybe getting trained and maybe getting a money generating career eventually. Like, I think if someone's working in your studio, they need to be paid. They need to be compensated in your studio. And if you're an employer out there who's still trying to get away with that model, you're also kind of screwing yourself over as a business owner, because like, you want the deduction. You want to be able to have that person on payroll getting compensated, and then like, you have that as a tax deduction. So I would just like to get to a point where it's a little bit more fair for everybody, and just be clear about it. Like, you're getting compensated this much for this level of work, and then if you're doing more work in the future, then you should, revisit your compensation with your employer.
And just to clear up something that you mentioned about observation as well, another word for that you sometimes will hear is shadowing. Mm-hmm. So the difference between shadowing and other forms of apprentice work or any other kind of paid work that you might be doing is that if you're observing or if you're shadowing, that's what you're doing. You're observing or shadowing. You're not doing your regular job. You're not doing your regular tasks. So that's an important difference to make. It's not really shadowing or observation if you're doing the work that you would normally be doing but not being paid. Yeah. So, I don't anymore have any shadowing really go on in the studio. Like, Jordan knows he has the option to shadow if he wants, but we're there both together full time now anyway, so it's irrelevant. Before, I would have absolutely had shadowing, and I never in my mind felt that there was an issue with shadowing, with observation. But listening to a lot of people's stories over the past few years and people talking about their experiences and things, I don't know how comfortable I would feel having somebody shadow anymore. And that's something that I've changed my opinion on since really learning about being an employer and kind of learning more about that new side of my job, because that's what it is. It's a new side of my job that I've had to learn how to do. I think I don't know how comfortable I would feel with it, and I think if someone is worth having there, they should be compensated, and that keeps it nice and easy. Even when there's been times that I've been doing work on building a second studio, as you know, and any time that Jordan's helped me with that, assisted me with that, it's been paid work, it's been paid time.
Yeah. When Rob was apprenticing, he was also the counter person, and basically like the system that we had was like, if you're here working, you're getting paid, and like, I'll certainly train you, and you could certainly observe and help and all that stuff like in spare time. But it's like, if you're here to work, you're here to work. But if you're working, you're getting paid to work. If you wanted to like learn some extra stuff and just like you wanted to stay when your shift is over and like watch a piercing because you're just interested in it, that's fine. But you're not going to be answering the phone and emptying the trash and doing all this extra stuff too. Like, you really need to understand what the roles are in the shop and make sure that people are fairly and appropriately compensated for them.
Yeah, I just wanted to, again, reiterate that not just from the perspective of the apprentice, but from the perspective of the mentor, the employer, that's a role that we're not typically trained to do, and it's a role that we have to grow into and that we often make mistakes at and have to get better at, and that's definitely something that I've had to do the last few years. So I just think, again, something that isn't talked about very much. I think we all assume that, well, I know how to pierce, so I know how to teach and I know how to be a boss and a manager and all of this stuff, and they're very different roles, very different dynamics, and it does take finesse to learn how to do those different things and navigate those different things, and I've had to learn how to do that. So if you're a piercer that has a lot of experience piercing, if you're very confident with your job, try and be humble enough to admit when you're not doing every aspect of it brilliantly, and that includes being an employer, and you have to be open to be like, I should be doing a better job at this, you know, and learn how to do those things. You're never too old to learn to do that.
I definitely had years in my shop where I was just like a piercer trying to keep the lights on and trying to get the bills paid. And over the last several years, like I'm focusing a lot more on the office than in the piercing room. And I had to learn so much to manage the studio, but not just for myself, but to manage it for the other staff members too. So I kind of want to wrap up that part of the conversation, maybe start to wind it down a little bit, and maybe we can hit on one or two other things from the year. One thing that I want to remind people that is still free out there is your really brilliant class, Predicting and Preventing Predatory Behavior. You recorded your presentation and we made it available completely for free for everybody on my Patreon. So patreon.com/RyanPBA has loads of the paid content, but you can get that class completely for free there. It's a really important subject, and I just want to remind people that it's still out there as a free resource. And I just want to kind of give you some flowers for being thoughtful enough.
I like flowers.
Yeah. For being thoughtful enough to write it and articulate it. And I've seen a lot of people take the class and change their mentality and to really help them kind of think about what they can do to protect the people in their studio, but people in the community overall. And it's just a really good resource for people, I think.
Well, I really appreciate anyone that's taken the time to watch it. It was definitely a very scary class for me to make because the class originated when I started writing my PA class, my Prince Albert class. I was trying to think of how to open the class, and then I thought, well, I don't really want to be helping anybody learn how to do an intimate piercing without them first understanding some of the potential risks they're taking on in doing that and how to navigate those risks. And then that's kind of how it developed as a whole supplement to the class. And anytime I've performed it before has been in front of a live audience, basically, where I think it's a lot easier to articulate certain thoughts or to take a moment or rephrase something and make sure that people don't misunderstand what you're saying. Whereas sitting down to record something like that's a lot more intimidating because it makes you dissect every word, every phrase. Oh, I hope this doesn't sound wrong, or I hope I'm not implying this. And so it was definitely a lot more stressful. And I think in the end, what pushed me to do it, along with you telling me that I should do it all the time, was thinking like, well, worst case scenario, someone's going to disagree and shred me about this. But best case scenario, somebody actually really benefits from this and it makes somebody safer and less likely to have a nasty experience. And really that's all that should matter, not me being upset that somebody's going to have a go at me. Like if anybody doesn't like it, they don't like it, but somebody might be helped by it, and that's what matters the most. Like that's the most important thing in all of it.
It's passive knowledge too. It helps your understanding when you get those potentially creepy phone calls, potentially creepy emails. They're not quite as scary. They're not quite as intimidating. It's just kind of like, well, I don't have to assume that this person is a predator, but maybe just the way that they phrase it, it comes from a place of them not knowing how to communicate with a body piercer. So it also helps you kind of dial in your response in the way that you communicate back or communicate openly with clientele. And it really helps to kind of protect them and protect you and to set firm boundaries and all those different things. So I'm not going to say that like all those scary people are out there and they're coming to get you. It really just helps you communicate better.
So speaking of potentially uncomfortable moments with intimate piercings, you had your own little moment when you were traveling back from UKAPP, I
Yeah.
think it was,
Yeah.
regarding your downstairs jingle jangles.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So UKAPP was in Manchester, and there's a big international airport. So I went straight home from there. And when you think large international airport, you would think like professional staff that has kind of seen it all. Like if you go through TSA in Boston, those people are so jaded, and it's like you can throw almost any scenario at them and they're going to be like, oh yeah, okay, let's just do this. This is commonplace. We've seen this 1,000 times before. I went through the body scanner, and in Manchester, the body scanner, you're required to like really have your legs kind of far apart when you go through the scanner, and it immediately picked up on all my, as you say, downstairs jingle jangles. And I mean, it's basically like a keychain worth of metal hanging off of me.
Sounds like Santa Claus is coming.
Yeah.
You know, it's like
Yeah, basically. And this poor fucking kid, he must have been like, I don't know, 21, something like that. And, you know, he was kind of going into it from a jaded position, being like, oh, do you have some coins in your pocket? And I was like, nope. And he's like, do you have metal in your pocket? And I was like, not in my pocket. And then he just gave me this like double take. And I had to like watch the expression on his face change as he figured out what I was trying to like subtly tell him. And he didn't know what to do. He took like the hand wand, passed it over me, and was like, beep, beep, you know, like pretty significant. And he's like, I don't know what to do. And I was like, well, look, man, like what they do in the States is they do a pat down with the back of the hand just to make sure that you're not like hiding a gun in your pants or something like that. And then like you're on your way. That's happened to me loads of times in the States. You go through and they're just like, oh yeah, we get it. You have piercings, just like dozens or hundreds of people a day that go through an airport. But this kid just didn't know what to do. He called over his supervisor, and his supervisor didn't even know what to do. And he just stood at, and he's just like, well, look, man, if you can't go through the scanner, you can't come through security and get on your plane. And I was like, well, what do you do if like, I was like, what, are you going to pull me off somewhere and like we'll do a visual check? And he's like, nope, we don't do that here. And I was like, well, what would you do if it was somebody with like a metal hip? And he's like, well, you know, it's obvious what that is. And it's like, well, it's not like you're going to cut somebody's hip open and like inspect the metal. So it's like, what are we going to do, buddy? Because I got a plane to catch. And then he was just like, just standing there. And I was like, look, man, I'm not upset at you, but this is a bad policy. Like, you're going to have people with piercings coming through this airport regularly. You need to have like a policy to work this stuff out. And then he just like whispered really quietly. He's just like, I hate this job, man. This is a terrible job. And I was like, I know, man, but we gotta figure this out. So basically I had to have the two guys bring me into like a private strip search room. And like they also had that like panic on their face where it's like, I don't want to have to look at this guy's junk. And I was like, don't worry, man, I'm not going to have to like, you know, pull my bag out or anything. But like what I had to do was I had to like pull down my pants, leave my underpants on, and then I just grabbed my downstairs and just gave it a good shake. And it was basically like, you know, like shaking a keychain or something. And I was like, can you guys get it? Get what it is? And it's like, you see that I don't have like, you know, a length of chain hidden in my underpants. And like they finally let me through, but it was really frustrating. It was pretty hilarious because like they were just so awkward and intimidated by it. And I was like, I don't care. This isn't my first rodeo, and this isn't my first time getting an extra search at an airport. But I was pretty surprised that they had never encountered anything like that before ever in a massive international airport.
And that their policy would be, well, if you can't go through the scanner without it going off, because lots of people, I set off the scanner all the time, and it makes me really worried. Why? Because it always shows up at some mystery spot in my abdomen where there is no metal, but it happens all the time. So that notion of it, well, everyone has to go through the scanner without setting it off is totally not true. They have to be able to identify what it is without any kind of reasonable doubt. I totally understand that, but I think that they were just in a little bit of a panic as to what to do.
A lot of times when I go through, like, I travel with pants that'll have, like, zips on the pockets or whatever, some sort of metal. And a lot of times when you go through those scanners, it's like the generic outline of a body, and then there'll be like the yellow box wherever it picked up metal somewhere. And a lot of times it'll just be over like one side of my pocket, and they'll just be like, oh yeah, you have a zip there. And it's like, okay, fine. If that's all you want to think it is, then that's fine. Let me go. But this one was a big yellow box right over my crotch. And the guy just looked at it and he's just like, do you have metal in your pocket? And I was like, not in my pocket. And it was just like, it was a really funny moment. But I'm glad that I got to at least get on the flight.
Yeah. I haven't had anything like that happen. I usually get frisked pretty thoroughly at the airport, again, because I wear dungarees usually, which set everything off because they have pin badges and buckles, and I'm like, I don't care, just give me the, pat me down and then send me on my way. I usually get my hair inspected though. More often than not, I'll get a frisking of the hair going on, which I understand because I got a lot of hair. So I'll get they might squeeze on my braids.
Yeah, but everything that you're saying is based on an airport policy because they know how to deal with people in similar scenarios. Like I would imagine people with big hair buns, dreadlocks, I'm sure that they've gotten hair pat downs before too. But what I was so shocked at was just that they had no policy in place. And it's like, what do you expect me to do? I
did 6 bawbag piercings on a guy, 3 and then another 3. And he was an airline pilot. And I told him your story and he thought it was very funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad somebody enjoyed it. So how do you want to wrap this up? Or do you want to just pull a plug on it now?
What else is on your little list?
That's pretty much it. 2023 was a fine year, but I'm still just kind of I don't know how to sugarcoat it.
It was the year that was 2023.
Yeah, it sure happened. It was a year after 2022. It wasn't a great year. It wasn't the worst year. I feel like it was if you made it to the end of this year, you deserve a pat on the back. And I just want to say that good job. I really I don't mean to make that in a cheesy way. It's if you made it to the end of the year, that's an accomplishment, and you should feel proud that your business is still open, that you're still breathing, that you're still waking up every day and you're getting through the day. Things aren't great. Things aren't great for you most days. Things aren't great for me most days. But we're still here, we're still kicking, and we made it through another year. So that's really the main point that I would like to make is we did it. You did it. And I want to just say, whoever you are out there, you did it too, and I'm proud of you for making it to the end. And I know it probably wasn't that easy.
2023 is the Ocean's 12 of the years. It's no one's favorite. No one loved it, but it's out there. It exists, and we're still waiting on our Ocean's 13 moment.
Yeah, I don't know that people out there are going to get the reference. But
well,
we watch Ocean's 11 and Ocean's 13 monthly, probably.
Yeah. So Ocean's 12 is very much my 2023. It had to happen for me to get to 2024, but I did it. I've had an enormous workload the last few months, opening up Forest 2, which will hopefully be open in the next couple of months, which sounds like a long time, but it's already been a couple of months. It's already been about 4 months of work. So we can talk about that another time on another episode. But that's kind of what I'm going to be focusing on, is just trying to remember that I'm over the hill. And there's still a lot of hill left, but I'm over that particular hill. And hopefully in the next couple of months I can get the studio open and running, and we can maybe talk about that experience a little bit more.
Sure.
But that's pretty much where I'm at.
I don't have any expectations for 2024. I have some concerns that it's going to suck in a lot of different ways, but I'm not giving up, and I don't want you to either.
I won't.
Okay. Well, thanks for listening to an upbeat episode of the Piercing Wizard podcast. I hope that your 2023 wasn't utter shit, and I hope that you will stick with us through 2024. We look forward to seeing you out there in the world at maybe a conference or just something joyful out there in the world. Anything you want to end by saying?
Go and see -1 if you get the
Yeah,
chance. Go see
Godzilla
Godzilla
-1.
-1. It was the highlight of, I think, both of our years. It was so good.
Yeah.
It was such a good movie. If you get the chance to see it in the cinema, you totally should. That's my advice.
Okay, that's good advice. Okay, thanks for sticking with us. We'll see you next year.
Happy New Year!
For more information about the show, visit piercingwizardpodcast.com or like Piercing Wizard Podcast on Facebook. For more info about your host, visit precisionbodyarts.com or search Ryan PBA on Facebook, Instagram, and Tumblr. If you enjoy the show, you can subscribe on iTunes, Apple Podcast, and Google Play. Music by Benny B. Blanco. Show copyright 2017, Precision Body Arts LLC, all rights reserved.